Hi, I'm Shelley Wood and this is my tiny sewing room where I make doll clothes sewing videos. Today I'm going to show you how to make a pink satin dress with a big bow in the front, 2 front pleats, 2 back pleats, and a zipper down the back. This dress is designed to fit 13-inch dolls like Judy Littlechap, collectible vintage doll, and member of the Littlechap family of Remco dolls. It will also fit the new My First Barbie 13-inch doll, who stands a little taller than regular Barbie. Now, before we begin, please go to my website, shelleywood.com, to download and print these 2 free PDF sewing patterns. Use your pattern to cut out 4 bodice backs, 2 bodice front pieces, and 1 skirt piece. Use a very small hole punch or a thicker than average straight pin to punch holes in your paper skirt pattern where you see those little black dots. Here I am doing that just quickly so you get the feel for what I mean. I'm just punching a hole so that I can mark my fabric with a fabric pencil. You're going to pin the pattern to your fabric and then cut out the skirt. Use a fabric pencil to mark the holes that you punched. Alright, so when I did this, I found it helpful to turn or twist the fabric pencil. That just makes it really solidify. Now, I recommend Dritz fabric pencils, and I've got a link to that brand below. Once your pencil marks are done, you can remove all your straight pins, check to make sure they're all aligned. Okay, and then you're going to set the skirt aside for a while. Use a Sharpie marker to darken the bodice darts. Be sure to let your ink dry before you mark your fabric. I use a light box to mark my darts, but you can use a window. It works well as a light box substitute. If you're going to use the window method, pin it to the pattern to hold it still, and then make sure you're marking the wrong side of the fabric or the dull side. A little Scotch tape will hold the pattern onto the window for you. I've marked my darts with a Dritz fabric pencil. On the wrong or less shiny side of the satin, fold the dart along the center line. Stitch along the outside lines. Follow these directions for both darts. Clip the dart's excess fabric. And that's what I'm doing here. I like to just show you what I mean because it might make you nervous to clip if you aren't sure what that means. Sew and clip darts in both bodice fronts. Lay one bodice front on top of another bodice front, keeping your right sides together, or the shiny side touches the shiny side. Sew around the neckline of the bodice front. Okay, and sew each armhole for the bodice front, just like you see here. Then clip all the seams you've sewn so far. Now, with a Sharpie, mark the dart in the back pattern. Again, wait for it to dry before you pin a fabric back to it wrong side up. Again, I'm using a Dritz fabric pencil. Now, because you've used a Sharpie to mark the darts, you can flip your pattern over to mark the left bodice backs. And that way you can see your marks for both sides. Again, with the shiny side of the satin down, fold the dart along the center line and stitch the outer lines together. Do this for all 4 bodice backs, making sure you have 2 left side backs and 2 rights. Clip the excess fabric away from each of your darts. And again, you'll see me doing that here. Fold the curve of the back closure area once and baste stitch it. Now if you need help with baste stitches, I have a tutorial for that. Just look for a link to my basting tutorial below. Satin does look sort of wobbly when you baste it, so follow these directions for all 4 back pieces. Lay one back on top of another, keeping right sides or shiny sides together. Stitch around the armhole area, just like you see here. Here's a closer look at the armhole stitches. Follow the same directions to make 2 bodice backs. Clip the bodice neckline in all 4 armhole areas. I use Fisker's 5-inch micro tips for detailed snips, and if you look in the description below this video on YouTube, you will find that I have an affiliate marketing link to my little Fisker snips, and they are so handy. These tools, I can't believe I went so long without them, especially when you're using slippery fabric like this satin. You really want to have a nice clean snip on these little clipped corners. Invert and press your seams. Now with satin fabric, set your iron on low heat before you press the garment pieces. And I would try pressing a piece of scrap satin fabric first, just to make sure that your iron isn't too hot, because it will ruin the fabric. Once you've inverted and pressed all 3 bodice pieces, lay one of the backs on top of the bodice front. Stitch across the shoulder. Now I used a back stitch for this. Notice that my back is still open. We'll be closing this later when we add the zipper. Lay the other back bodice piece over the front. Sew across the shoulder strap as well. Open the bodice up like this. Press the seams flat. Okay, now this next part is going to be tricky. Open the bodice front like this so you can see inside, and do the same for the bodice back, bringing the side seams together like you see me doing right here. Okay, so you open the bodice front, you slip your thumb in between the 2 bodice backs on the raw edge side, okay, and then you bring these 2 pieces together. Now we're going to stitch from my left thumb to my right thumb, or from my right thumb to my left thumb, okay? To bring those together, we'll be stitching them together at the side seam from there to here. Stitch across the side seam from one end to the other, and here you can see where my stitches are. And I'm just going to close it temporarily so you get a feel for why we did that, okay? So this makes it all one piece. Of course, we still need to attach the other back. Here's how it looks when one side is done. Now do the same thing for the opposite side seam of the bodice. So your garment starts out looking like this. You open the bodice front at that side, like so, and then you open the bodice back also at the side, like so, and join these 2 sides together. Again, this can be tricky, so I'm going to show you in video format. Okay, so here's my bodice front side, here's my bodice back side, and I'm going to bring those 2 sides together to create a side seam, sewing from one end to the other. You're going to stitch across the side openings, Again, I used a backstitch for this, and if you'd like to see my backstitch tutorial, it's also in the description. Clip the seam in the middle on both sides and invert the garment bodice. Now, I'm going to show you what I mean. I'm clipping on each side, okay, and then I invert it so that it looks like this. Let's take a look at what we have so far. I like to just pause every now and then and give you an idea. Here's where you should be. So the whole bodice can be opened now. Okay, this is the inside or lining. This is the outside. I'll call that the outer fabric. Okay, and the back still has a gap there, but we will get to that when we attach the zipper. And there you go. Set the bodice aside and let's work with the skirt for a little while. On one of the longest sides of the rectangle, fold the fabric once and then a second time to create a hem. Okay, so I've got my pattern here to kind of guide how deep I want these hem folds. I fold once and then a second time. Okay, and now I'm ready to start a whip stitch. Of course, you could use a sewing machine. I just like to whip stitch. When working with slippery satin, it can help to pin the hem in place while you're hemming. I used a whip stitch, removing my pins as I sewed this whip stitch. Now if you need help with the whip stitch, I do have a tutorial for that. Just look in the description below this video on YouTube. Next, mark the arrows from your paper pattern. I put my marks on the wrong or dull side, but I keep in mind that the arrows actually show the direction for the pleats on the right side, okay, or the shiny side. So I just put them on the wrong side so they're not visible when the garment is finished. Now take your sewing needle and you're going to poke the sewing needle through one of the dots you marked and then through the other. Okay, now the arrow tells you which direction to press your pleat to. Okay, so you want to press the pleat in the direction of the arrow, but for now I'm just going to tie a little knot here. I tried to design this dress to look a lot like the pink dress that Judy Littlechap had in her collection of garments in the early 1960s. So it actually did have pleats like this. Sorry, I'm out of the camera for a minute. I want to make sure that on the right side the pleat goes that way, like the arrow shows. It's a little confusing because I put my arrow on the wrong side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put another stitch in there to make sure that the pleat goes that direction. Think of it this way. We're going to put the zipper where my left hand is. And so I want the pleat to face that zipper, all right, that direction. And so I'm going to tack that down with one more little knot to make sure that the pleat is going in that direction toward the zipper. The original Judy Littlechap has a pleat that does something similar, and that's why you want it to go that way. Okay, once again, that'll be toward the left. Okay, now I'm not quite done. We're going to also tack another knot on the back here, but for the time being, okay, if you're feeling confident, I've shown you how to make one pleat. So if you're feeling confident and you've got it figured out, you can skip the next 3 minutes of this very long video because I'll be showing you how to do the other 3 pleats. But if you feel like you understand it, just move on. Okay, so what I'm going to do on the back here, I'm going to tie one more little knot just to kind of hold this pleat in place. One more little knot, and you want it fairly close to the edge of the fabric so that when you attach the skirt piece to the bodice, you won't be able to see those stitches. There we go, and we are going to press that. It should look like this in front on that left side, okay, but it's a good idea to tack it down on the wrong side as well. And now I'm going to show you the others. So again, you put your needle and thread through the 2 dots you've made, pull it tight together, pay attention to the direction the arrow is going, and remember that we have drawn on the wrong side, but it indicates the direction of the pleat on the right side. Okay, and then I'm going to tack this down in the back. So the 2 pleats in the front are going to point toward the notch at the middle. There is a little notch right at the middle, and those pleats are going to be pointed toward the notch. And I'm sorry I'm off camera a little bit. Like you, I wanted to do a good job on my pleats, so I was very certain to make sure that they, you know, were in the right spot. I had to kind of pull it toward me so I could make sure. Okay, so now I've got both of the front pleats pointed toward the notch, and I'm tacking the back down just to make sure that it stays stable when I sew it. I have one more pleat to do, and that's the one on the far right. And you can see the arrow is pointing toward it. My arrows did kind of bleed through my satin a little, and that kind of helped actually, if you can just prevent seeing those when you finish. Okay, so I'm moving that one, making sure that my pleat points toward the zipper zone. Okay, and then I'm going to go to the back and just put one little knot that kind of holds it in place there. Okay, and there we have it. It looks pretty good. Once you've finished your pleats, press them with that temperature cool iron. You don't want it too hot. If you get that iron too hot, you will damage all the work you did. Pin the skirt to the bodice's outer fabric only, starting at the notch and moving outward. Don't pin it to the lining, just the outer bodice. Okay, so to make sure you understand, here's my outer bodice. Okay, so I've got seams that are closed there. Here's my notch, and you'll notice there's a notch on the skirt, and we're going to flip it around so right sides are together. I'm going to bring those 2 notches together, but notice that the lining is kind of sticking out and away, so that I'm not going to pin that lining. I'm just pinning the outer bodice to the skirt at the notch. Now I like to put a pin where every pleat is. Just because pleats have a tendency to be slippery, especially if you're using a sewing machine, you really want to make sure that you pin those pleats because of the slipperiness of satin. So I'm going to pin this pleat down. You could put one more pin right at the edge of the bodice back, just to kind of let you know where to stop sewing. You're going to stitch the skirt to the outer bodice with right sides facing, and you're going to stitch starting from the notch to the edge of the bodice back, removing the straight pins as you stitch. And again, I did a back stitch for this. There should be about 1 centimeter of overhanging fabric. Okay, so here's my notch. I've sewn just this half. Again, my bodice lining is detached. I'm not quite ready to attach it. And see where my right finger pointed there for a second? There's a little bit of overhang on the left. Pin and stitch from the notch to the other side. Okay, so now I'm pinning again, making sure that my right hand side pleats are really held still. Again, I'm only attaching the outer bodice to the other half of the skirt, not attaching the lining. Where you have overhanging fabric, you're going to fold it down. Then fold the side edge of the skirt in once and then a second time. Okay, so I've finished attaching the bodice to the skirt. Again, not the lining. I fold this extra fabric down once and then fold it in and fold it in a second time. Okay, and we're just creating a little closure here at the back. You're going to baste down the length of the skirt with really wide stitches. I do recommend a wide base stitch here. Base stitch both sides of the skirt this way. Here's a closer look at those extra wide stitches. Unzip your 3-inch zipper. With the zipper pulled down and the bodice back open, pin the zipper to the back closure area on just one side of the dress. I used a backstitch to hand stitch my zipper to the garment. Stitching by hand may seem tedious, but it's also very precise, so it will fit nicely. See those little metal stops on the zipper? The back pattern has a line indicating that stop. Your zipper should now look like this. Seam rip or unpick the based stitch that you've made along the side that has the zipper attached. Okay, now when we use a seam ripper or unpicker, you need to be very careful with satin. It can easily be snagged. So really slowly, and that's why I'm not doing this in fast motion. I want you to notice that I'm taking my time trying to get my little unpicker tip underneath. And then I also think to myself, okay, when can I start pulling this baste out? Because once you can start pulling the baste stitch out, you want to quit trying to do that so you don't accidentally snag. So here I grab a hold of the knot and I give it a good tug, and now I have completely pulled apart that base stitch. Pull your zipper closed for the next step. Lift the bodice lining and keep it out of the way. Pull the other half of the dress toward the zipper and pin the waist to the zipper, being very careful to align the waist seams. Okay, so I close my zipper, I lift up that bodice lining, and then I pull over this other and align those with a quick pin. I finish pinning the back and skirt to the zipper. Again, you don't want to be working with the lining yet. That comes later. You can see I'm getting it out of the way. And now unzip the zipper for easier finger access and backstitch to finish attaching the zipper to the garment. Unpin as you go. Once you've finished attaching the zipper on this side, from the bodice to the middle of the skirt, you're going to seam rip or unpick the base stitches on this side. Now at the bottom of the zipper there's a little extra fabric. You can pinch this extra fabric together and stitch from the zipper's edge to the hem, or you can create a vent, which is what I did. The original Judy Littlechap dress does not have a vent, but I wanted a vent, and that's just optional. So here I am unpicking my baste. Okay, I turn it inside out. Now you can just pinch it together and sew it from the zipper all the way down, but to make the vent, you're going to stitch from the bottom of the zipper about 2 centimeters down and then hem the vent. I used a whip stitch for this. The flaps of extra fabric were double folded before I started my hem on the vent area. With your garment still inside out, grab one of the unattached backs. Fold it under at the waist, hiding the stitches you've already sewn at the waist. Pin the waist in place and whip stitch the 2 backs. attaching them from the shoulder along the zipper line and right down to the waist where you've pinned. Okay, so what does all that mean? Here is my back lining. I've got it in my left hand. I'm going to fold it back, and then I'm going to fold it under right near the zipper. Okay, I haven't quite shown you that, so be patient. Here we go. I'm going to fold this under, and then I'm going to try to hide all the stitches that made the waist under that. Okay, I'm going to pin it in place just to hold it there until I get to it. It's always a good idea when working with satin to make sure all of your needles and pins have been sharpened. If they are not sharp, or if they are rusty, you do risk the possibility of putting a run in your satin. Okay, now I'm hiding my knot between the two backs, and then I begin a whip stitch here, and I'm going to whip stitch down, closing the gap between the two backs. Just keep whip stitching down that till we get down here to where my left index finger is. Once you reach the pin that you placed at the waist, you're going to whip stitch along the waist, folding the bodice lining under as you stitch. It can be tricky, but you want to hide your stitch as best you can while stitching clear around the waist to the opposite side. Then you're going to seal the other back. Now finally, tack the remaining zipper onto the skirt's previously basted folds to make sure the zipper is well attached. Turn your garment right side out and test the zipper before attaching the bow. Now let's make the ribbon. Use your pattern to cut out these two pieces. On the pattern, these are called the bow on the right and the loop, the smaller piece, shown on the left. Let's start with the small piece, the loop. Fold one of the longer sides of the rectangle as shown. Press this fold with a not too hot iron. Fold the other longest side and press. Now you're going to be left with something that looks like a gum wrapper. Set this aside for a moment, and we're going to work with the bow. It doesn't look like it, but it actually is a rectangle, not a square. Fold one of its shorter sides in as shown and press this fold. Baste the fold as well. Do the same with the other short side. Fold it in half like a hot dog with right sides facing. Stitch across the unsewn length of it. Invert the tube you've made. Carefully seam rip or unpick your baste stitches. Pinch one end together with the seam toward the back. Hiding your stitches on the seam side, whip stitch the end closed. This is how the back of your bow looks now. Follow the same directions for the opposite side. Use your pattern to help you locate the center of the bow. Gather the center of the bow with a few stitches. Here's how your bow will look from the finished side. Place the loop over the finished side of the bow right in the center. At the back of the bow, fold the raw edges under toward the bow's seam and whip stitch to seal the loop. With a thread extending from the center of the loop, Send your needle through the very center point of the waist of your dress. Knot your thread on the inside of the dress to secure the bow in place. Now you're ready to try the dress on your doll. For more free, printable PDF sewing patterns to fit dolls of many shapes and all different sizes, please remember to visit my website, shelleywood.com.